On the economy, we're not even a month into 2024, and a new pattern is emerging. Americans are feeling more and more optimistic about the economy. Last week, a report by the University of Michigan showed that consumer sentiment, how consumers feel about the economy, surged by 29% over the last 2 months, the biggest 2-month increase in over 3 decades, in over 30 years. Higher consumer sentiment means Americans have more money in their pockets and are feeling better about their financial future. That is precisely what the Democratic agenda is all about: lowering costs, increasing wages, fueling economic growth. That's why Democrats passed historic legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Law, and more. When you pass an ambitious agenda like the ones the Democrats have passed under President Biden, it can take some time for the effects to take hold. But by now, the signs are getting clearer and clearer. Under President Biden, under Democratic leadership, the country is on the right track. Real wages are rising. In fact, paychecks have outpaced inflation over the past year, meaning people's paychecks are going further. Inflation is cooling down, now to 3.4%. When we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, it was over 8%. Unemployment is falling. The economy created 2.7 million new jobs last year, more jobs than any year of the Trump administration. And manufacturing investment levels are at an all-time high, again, more than double the peak of the Trump administration. That's the difference between Democratic and Republican leadership. When Democrats were elected into office, we passed legislation to lower costs, to bring American manufacturing back, to lower prescription drug costs, which is already happening, and invest in science and innovation. But what about the hard right? What about what's going on with our Republican colleagues? Well, look at what they spend time talking about: shutting down the government. That's what the hard right does. We're getting things done for the American people. They're talking about shutting down the government, pushing America towards default. Amazingly, the hard right, which has a lot of sway in the House and too much in the Senate, said default would be a good thing. Attacking a woman's right to choose, wasting time on sham impeachments, and drastic cuts to veterans aid, nutrition programs, education, federal law enforcement. No wonder some Republicans are so concerned they have no real accomplishments to show the American people. The difference, frankly, is night and day. Democrats are focused on lowering costs, more jobs, and more money in people's pockets. But the hard right is consumed by chaos, bullying, cutting in vital investments, making things worse. They want to make things worse. Somehow that's their credo. The Republican frontrunner for president has made it abundantly clear that he's not running on making people's lives better, but rather on airing his personal political grievances, as we saw in last night's so-called victory speech. So, we still have a long way to go to make our economy better. We're working better for families, but the evidence is growing that under President Biden, we're headed in the right direction, and Americans are seeing it for themselves. I yield the floor and note the absence of quorum. Thank you. Lisa, she's very nice and she doesn't push herself forward, and I saw her hand.
I mean, disappoint my fellow reporters with a kind of wonky question. I hear what you're saying about the CR, the need to move forward now. House conservatives, though, are concerned about the debt, and they say they want a fiscal commission. That's one of Speaker Johnson's priorities, but they want it to have teeth. Can you agree to a fiscal commission on the debt?
Look, we have to get this done by Friday. The right-wingers come up with a new idea every day and say they have to have this, they have to have that. Speaker Johnson said he wants to get this done. I think he has the support of a good majority of the House, and I think we'll get it done quickly. Yes, so here.
Leader McConnell just said a few moments ago that he expects a Senate vote on the supplemental and Ukraine aid bill as early as next week. Is that possible? Is that your goal?
Look, as Chris Murphy said, as I said, we are really making good progress. I am really pleasant. I'm in a good mood today, in part because we are really making good progress, and I've talked about how important this is for months. And so I think, you know, I'm not going to set any deadlines or artificial, but we are making good progress, and I'm really optimistic we can get this done. Manu.
What does it say to you that Donald Trump is facing 91 criminal charges, yet poll after poll shows him beating Joe Biden?
Look, Joe Biden's going to be the next president, as he is the present president. You know, if you look at the results in Iowa, I'm not sure 51% in a state where there was a turnout as small as it was, is that great a thing for President Trump? Yes.
Is the goal of the meeting here to try to start to triangulate on the speaker here? If you're getting closer on the border, and the idea that you have to get something, as Senator Murphy alluded to, on Ukraine soon, that you've got to get something moving here quickly.
Yeah, the goal here is, frankly, to make it clear that things are changing in Ukraine for the worse, and that if we don't get aid to them quickly, the whole thing could turn around and be irretrievable. Go ahead, Bolton.
Leader Thune just highlighted that there were more than 800,000 migrants paroled in the country in 2023. Is that a problem, and does Congress have a role to lower that number?
Look, I'm not going to get into the specifics. We're getting closer and closer to a deal. The only way to get an agreement is bipartisan. You need Democrats and Republicans each agreeing, in the House and the Senate. Neither party can pass a bill on its own without bipartisanship on border or on much else. Last comment.
Are you concerned if you pass aid for Israel without conditions, that it might hurt you in the upcoming elections with Democrats who are calling for a ceasefire, who feel like the military...
Look, let me say this. On conditions, our caucus is discussing it, and we'll continue to look for the best way forward. But as I've said, there are 4 goals that we have when it comes to the war in Gaza. 1, radically reduce the threat to Hamas, a terrorist organization. 2, free the hostages. 3, get humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza who need that help. And 4, Israel should try to reduce the number of civilian casualties. Thank you, everybody. Mr. President, on clean energy investment. When President Biden comes before the Congress to deliver his State of the Union this week, Americans will hear a clear theme. America's economy is accelerating, inflation is decelerating, and the investments Democrats made in the past few years. I was proud to be Majority Leader during probably the most successful, productive Congress in 30 years, and these investments are really paying off. Today, for example, many Americans are paying less for insulin than they did a few years ago, thanks to reforms we made on the IRA. Seniors on Medicare have a cap on prescription drug spending. No longer does a serious illness mean seniors on Medicare spend $10,000 or more in prescription drug expenses. Consumer sentiment is way up compared to 2 years ago. And despite so many naysayers who were sure there'd be a recession, inflation has slowed to more normal levels without causing a recession. In fact, manufacturing construction is at an all-time high, triple its highest point during the last administration, the Trump administration. And these are just the accomplishments of the past year. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is projected to create another 1.5 million jobs over the next decade. But today, I want to point out another part of our agenda, delivering beyond anyone's wildest expectations: the surge in America's clean energy and the jobs it creates. The New York Times put it best in a recent article when they noted that, quote, clean energy manufacturing is booming. Thanks to investments Democrats made in the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act and other bills, clean investments just last year reached over $230 billion. For context, that's triple the investment levels of 2019, just 5 years ago. Many companies who invested towards clean energy have said legislation like IRA and CHIPS and Science made their decisions easier. And while $230 billion can seem hard to visualize, the practical impacts of these investments are plain as day. Americans see these investments at work through new EV battery plants, new construction sites, new good-paying jobs that will stick around for years. Our economy has added nearly 30,000 jobs in power generation and supply, a stark turnaround from years of decline during the previous administration. New Yorkers see these investments through the surge of onshore wind and solar energy production, and through all the factory openings we've seen across the state, particularly in upstate New York, an area that in the past had lost jobs, manufacturing jobs, is now growing again. It's great news. Makes us all very happy. Consumers will see these investments at work through cheaper EVs. And in time, Americans everywhere will see these investments pay off through less pollution, cleaner air, fewer kids getting sick from asthma and other illnesses. That's something we're very proud of. Sometimes it can take a while for the effects of an ambitious agenda to take root. We saw this happen with ACA. But today, the evidence is pouring in that President Biden and Democrats put in over the past few years. The investments are paying off in a big way for our country, and Americans are beginning to take notice. Okay, thanks for coming, everybody, and thanks to Senators Stabenow, Smith, Cortez, Masto. Quiet back there. Well, we know it's a big week in the Capitol, State of the Union, and this week we wanted to highlight some of the Senate Democrats' accomplishments under President Biden's leadership for American families. When President Biden comes before Congress to deliver his State of the Union, Americans will hear a clear theme. America's economy is growing, inflation is slowing, and the Democratic agenda is delivering. Today, many Americans are paying less for insulin than they did a few years ago, thanks to the Democrats in the Senate and House and the President. Seniors on Medicare have a cap on prescription drug spending. No longer does a serious illness mean seniors have to spend thousands of dollars on prescription drugs. That's huge. Hey, folks. Thank you. And thank you. Despite so many naysayers who predicted a recession, inflation slowed without causing a recession. It's 2.8%. No one thought it would be this low now. And the Inflation Reduction Act is projected to create another 1.5 million jobs, good-paying jobs, over the next decade. But I wanted to point out another part of our agenda delivering beyond anyone's wildest expectations: the surge in clean energy and clean energy jobs. To quote the New York Times, quote, "Clean energy manufacturing is booming. Thanks to investments Democrats made in the Inflation Reduction Act, in CHIPS and science and other bills, clean energy investments last year reached over $230 million. For context, that's triple the investment levels of 2019, just 5 years ago. And while $230 billion can seem hard to visualize, the practical impact of these investments are just beginning. 15 million jobs since Biden took office. 15 million jobs. Americans see these investments at work, in EV battery plants, new construction sites, good-paying jobs that will stick around for years. These are jobs for the future. They're not going away in a year or two. And in time, Americans everywhere will see these investments in their wallets, but also in their futures. Less pollution, cleaner air, fewer kids getting asthma and other illnesses. That's something we are really proud of. Sometimes it takes a while for the effects of an ambitious agenda to take root. Look at ACA. But today the evidence is starting to come in. The work that President Biden and Democrats put in over the past few years is paying off in a big way for our country. Americans are beginning to take this. Now on the American Rescue Plan anniversary. Madam President, today's the 3-year anniversary of President Biden signing the American Rescue Plan into law, which I was proud to lead here in the Senate. After Congress passed the ARP plan, I said, help is on the way. That was the promise of the American Rescue Plan, to put shots in arms, to put money in people's pockets, and to propel our country out of the COVID crisis. 3 years later, it's safe to say these investments have paid off, and that the American Rescue Plan put America and our economy on a path toward the historic recovery we're witnessing today. Before the American Rescue Plan, job growth was unsteady. Millions were at risk of losing their jobs. 3 years later, we've seen the strongest 3-year job growth in American history, 15 million new jobs since President Biden took office. Before the American Rescue Plan, the U.S. was losing manufacturing jobs by the day. 3 years later, manufacturing investment, something that plagued America even before the pandemic, is near an all-time high, more than double its highest point during the previous administration. Critics argued that the American Rescue Plan would cause excessive inflation. Well, 3 years later, inflation has cooled down to the lowest level since the start of the pandemic, from 9% to just below 3%, meaning the prices of things like groceries, appliances, car rentals, and airfares have all come down. In the American Rescue Plan, we secured significant pension reform through the passage of the Butch-Lewis Act, which has helped millions and millions of American workers receive the financial security they earn through their labors. I was proud to bring Deborah Hartman from Buffalo, New York, as my guest to President Biden's State of the Union last week. She called this critical plan the best thing that's happened to labor in I don't know how many years. It means the world to working people. We also included a dramatic expansion of the child tax credit, which helped millions and millions of families afford the cost of child care and other needs. We provided millions in rental relief to help people keep a roof over their heads, billions in fiscal relief for states, cities, and localities to help them stay afloat, billions for education and broadband access to help kids get back in the classroom, and much more. The bottom line is this. 3 years after President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan, it's proving to be a historic win for American families, workers, and the economy. And it's thanks to the American Rescue Plan and other landmark legislation we passed, like the infrastructure law, CHIPS and science, and the Inflation Reduction Act, that today the U.S. economy is the envy of the world. Of course, our work's far from over, but we can look back and be very proud of what we accomplished in the ARP. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum. Thank you, Madam President. Now, Madam President, today, President Biden released his budget for fiscal year 2025. President Biden's budget can be summarized in 3 words: bold, optimistic, responsible. President Biden's budget highlights the sharp contrast between the Democrats' positive, proactive vision and the Republicans' negative, regressive vision for our country. Democrats are focused on growing the economy in a responsible way, while making smart investments in the American people and our future. And that's why a centerpiece of President Biden's budget focuses on creating opportunity for working Americans by ending the reckless Trump-era tax scam, which overwhelmingly cut taxes for the wealthiest few and large corporations and added trillions to the national debt. It was recently confirmed that the Republican tax law did not pay for itself, as we heard over and over again from our Republican colleagues. Democrats know that we can and must do better. As the President pointed out during his State of the Union address last week, a fair tax code is how we can better invest in things like health care, education, and economic opportunity for more Americans. President Trump's tax scam proved everything but fair. It rewarded the wealthy, the well-connected, while leaving working families with the tab. Time has shown that this tax scam was a dud for our economy and a political loser for the Republican Party because the American people saw it for what it was. Republicans also talk a big game about lowering the deficit, but President Biden's budget actually proposes measures to do it. It proposes measures to reduce the deficit by nearly $3 trillion over the next decade. That budget will help improve the solvency of vital programs like Medicare and Social Security, which tens of millions of Americans rely on every single day. It will reinstate the child tax credit we passed in the American Rescue Plan, which greatly reduced child poverty before expiring. And that's not all. President Biden's budget builds on the progress Democrats have made to help grow America from the middle out and the bottom up. From the infrastructure law to the CHIPS and Science Act, to the Inflation Reduction Act, to the PACT Act, and more. Democrats made a lot of good investments that are already paying off for the American people. Inflation is cooling down. Manufacturing is surging. Consumer sentiment is growing. The cost of insulin and other drugs is falling. And we've created a record 15 million new jobs since President Biden took office. President Biden's budget will help ensure we continue to make good on the investments from our agenda and build an economy that works for everyone. Here's the bottom line. President Biden's budget shows there are two clear choices for America's future and highlights Democrats' vision for a better America. Democrats want to keep taxes low for middle-class families and make the ultra-wealthy pay their fair share, while Republicans fight to make it easier for wealthy tax cheats to pay less than middle-class families. Democrats will protect Medicare and Social Security, while Republicans look to cut these hard-earned benefits. Democrats want to make investments so every American family can do better, while Republicans want those who have already done very well to do even better. So I thank President Biden for releasing a bold, optimistic, responsible budget for the nation. And that's why we want to pass, we've been working on this all weekend, that's why we want to pass the bipartisan Senate infrastructure bill because, tensions in the Middle East are very high. That's why we want to pass the National Security Supplemental. It's critical, and we are all urging Speaker Johnson to put it on the floor of the House. It passed the Senate in a large bipartisan majority with 70 votes. Okay? We'll take questions on these two subjects. First, on credit cards. Any questions? Okay. Then on Iran. Okay. Have a nice, yes. Well, as I've said, I think the charges are absurd. There's no evidence, zero evidence, that he's committed an impeachable offense. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Sure. Here we go. Great. My pleasure. Have a nice day, everybody. Now on student loan debt. Since the day the president took office, I've urged him to use every tool available to cancel as much student debt as possible. Yesterday, the American people received some exciting news. President Biden, to his credit, announced a new executive action to provide student debt relief to nearly 30 million more Americans. Specifically, the president's plan will automatically forgive interest accrued on existing student loans for 25 million borrowers. The president's plan will also automatically cancel the full amount of debt for over 4.5 million Americans who have already qualified for forgiveness through a decade in a repayment program. And it will provide more than 10 million borrowers with at least $5,000 in debt relief. This announcement is a clear sign that the president is listening. He's listening to Congress's call to take action, which I've done for years. And he's listening to the pleas of millions of borrowers who want to get their lives back on track. So today's announcement is good news. It's good news for everyone, particularly for young people and people of color. And Democrats will continue exploring every option under the sun to lower costs and make college more affordable. Already the president's plan has removed the total debt burden for over 4 million Americans. This plan goes much further. But on the other hand, unfortunately, our Republican colleagues continue to oppose student debt relief and have wrapped their arms firmly around the MAGA Supreme Court's cruel decision to block student debt cancellation for millions of Americans. And Democrats are going to make sure the American people won't forget it. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. And thank you for Senator Stabenow and Kelly for joining us today. So we had a productive lunch. We went over many important issues facing the Senate. We talked about our accomplishments. There are many. And this week we came back to news that we've added over 300,000 jobs last month, blowing past expectations, proving once again our economy is building back stronger than ever. 15 million new jobs, 15 million, a record. Just yesterday, as Senator Kelly will elaborate, President and Secretary Raimondo announced a deal with TSMC, $65 billion in private investment. Amazing. So let the good news ring from coast to coast. The CHIPS and Science Act, which I worked hard to pass in the Senate, is delivering on its promise, bringing manufacturing back to America, shoring up our supply chains, increasing our national security. Just like the announcements of global foundries, Intel, and others, the announcement means new jobs new economic activity, and there's more yet to come. Stay tuned about Micron and its $100 billion investment in upstate New York. The CHIPS and Science Act, along with the infrastructure law, the IRA, the American Rescue Plan, all show that Democrats made historic investments in manufacturing and workers. Now it's clear those investments are paying off. Though House Republicans have spent a lot of energy attacking women's choice, calling for cuts to Social Security and raising the retirement age, the contrast is glaring. We're creating jobs and wealth and new economy. They're talking about cutting back on women's rights, cutting Social Security, raising the retirement age. Also this week, President Biden announced executive action to relieve the burden of student debt for 30 million Americans. You want to reduce people's costs? Reduce the debt burden. It's a huge, huge anchor around the feet of so many Americans. And what President Biden did is great news for everyone, particularly borrowers in communities of color who are disproportionately impacted by the student debt crisis. For too long, the debt has held back borrowers from reaching the middle class. President Biden's giving them a chance to achieve their dream. So we're going to continue to focus on American families. We're waiting for Republicans to join us. Senator Stabenow. Today is a big day for America for common sense gun safety reform. This morning, the Biden administration announced a rule expanding background checks and closing loopholes for online sales and gun shows, a direct result of the bipartisan gun safety law passed 2 years ago. This gun safety announcement has been decades in coming. It is the first significant expansion of background checks since I led passage of the Brady Bill way back in 1993. Today's announcement, expanding background checks, shows change is possible when both sides work together, even if progress is hard and halting. After all, a few years ago, this announcement would have been unimaginable. Because Democrats and Republicans, both together, cast aside the influence of groups like the NRA and work together, today's announcement has been made possible. The expansion of background checks will save lives. It'll be easier to prevent guns from falling into the wrong hands. It will show parents, kids, and teachers, and Americans everywhere impacted by gun violence that Congress is listening. We have a lot of work to do, but today's a clear step in the right direction. As author of the Brady Law, today's announcement on background checks is a proud moment and a galvanizing one. We should build on these historic bills passed in 2022 and cure our nation of the disease of gun violence. Today, Mr. President, President Biden announced he is taking new steps to protect U.S. workers and put the Chinese Communist Party on notice with a new round of tariffs on goods vital for America's economic future. I commend President Biden for standing up for American workers and making it clear to the CCP that they will face the consequences for their trade abuses. Fighting the CCP's unfair trade practices is something I've cared about for a very long time. It was one of the very first issues I focused on when I first visited upstate New York as a senator and saw for myself jobs leaving the shores. The CCP has shown that they will stop at nothing to steal our intellectual property and undermine our economy. When I met with President Xi during my CODEL last fall, I pointedly confronted him about the Chinese government's history of trade abuses and said we need to create a more even level playing field. And today's tariffs are thus a good step towards reversing America's trade imbalances and protect U.S. production of everything from batteries to solar cells to semiconductors to steel and aluminum. I'm particularly pleased that President Biden's tariffs will boost American EVs and clean energy manufacturing. With all the investments we Democrats made in the Inflation Reduction Act to boost EV manufacturing, something I cared a lot about and worked hard for, it would be terrible for America's roads to become saturated with EVs made in China, and these tariffs will help prevent that. We've taken major steps to reverse the ossification of U.S. manufacturing with the infrastructure law, the IRA, and CHIPS and Science. but the president's tariffs are also a critical part of the solution. Okay, first, I want to thank Chairman Durbin and all, it said he's going first, but he said I could go first, so I'm thanking them in advance. I want to thank you for your great remarks. No, it doesn't say that. I want to thank Chair Durbin and all of the Senate Democrats on the Judiciary Committee. They've done amazing work. Dick will get into the details. But this is an incredible milestone. This is a great day for America because we have expanded the judiciary. We have 200 lifetime appointments, and those are people who are going to really bring more justice and more diversity and more credibility to the bench. So it's a happy day for America, a very happy day for America. 200 judges confirmed to lifetime appointments under President Biden and this Democratic majority. 200 judges who are restoring balance and excellence to our courts. 200 judges increasing the diversity and dynamism of our judiciary. And 200 judges who are committed to applying the law fairly, impartially, and equally. You know, in the past, most of the people who got on the bench, or all too many, were white, male partners of big fancy law firms. That's changed. Of these 200 judges, we are so proud. 2/3 are women, 127. 2/3 are people of color, 125. Both had been traditionally underrepresented on the bench. We're catching up. We got a ways to go. But the bench for too long didn't look like America. It only looked like a portion of America. And now we are expanding to realize that all of America should be on the bench with federal judges who have such power. We're making our courts look more like America, something we can all be proud of. Over twice as many women and 3 times as many people of color confirmed under the last administration. More black judges, more Latino judges, more Asian American judges, the first Muslim American man and woman on the bench, the first Navajo federal judge, and of course the first black woman to sit on the United States Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. And there's not just demographic diversity, there's professional diversity. As I said, not just partners in big law firms and prosecutors. We have public defenders, we have legal aid lawyers, we have consumer lawyers, immigration lawyers. Lawyers who have represented all kinds of people who deserve representation on the bench. We've confirmed more judges who are committed to preserving voting rights and upholding the rights of workers and families and immigrants. We have labor lawyers on the bench too. In other words, we've confirmed more judges who embody the very ideal of America. A place where rule of law is protected, where the rights of all are honored, and where everyone gets a fair shake. And I want to take this opportunity just to talk a little about New York, where I'm very proud Senator Gillibrand and I have worked so hard together. We have confirmed, since President Biden took office, the Senate has confirmed 17 well-qualified judges to serve on the federal bench. Eunice Lee, the second African-American woman ever to serve on the Second Circuit. Nusrat Chowdhury, the first Muslim woman and the first Bangladeshi on the federal bench ever. Ali Nathan, only the second openly LGBT woman to be confirmed on any circuit court and just the 4th gay out of the circuit court judge circuit ever. Of our 17 judges in New York, 12 are women, 11 are judges of color and come from professions previously unrepresented. Dale Ho, one of the brilliant voting rights lawyers in America from the ACLU's Voting Rights Project. Myrna Perez, daughter of Mexican immigrants from the Brennan Center of Justice, the second Hispanic woman to serve on the Second Circuit, the first being Judge Sotomayor. Nina Morrison, formerly an attorney for the Innocence Project and one of 2 openly LGBTQ district judges in the Eastern District. Finally, the people behind me, led by Chair Durbin, deserve tremendous credit. You know, the Judiciary Committee is often a contentious committee, We got a couple of the people from the other side who always like to pick fights, but these folks have been stalwart in sitting through them and making sure these judges are confirmed. The Judiciary Committee has done an amazing, amazing job. I salute them, and I want to call on their great leader, Chairman Durbin, to say a few words. Now, on immigration, 12 years ago this week, President Obama announced the creation of DACA, one of the most important programs in our country's history on immigration. It changed the lives of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people for the better. People who came to this country when they were very little and who, for all intents and purposes, knew America as their only home. Today, President Biden is announcing the most significant relief program for immigrants since DACA, expanding protection for hundreds of thousands of undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens. They are not documented, but they are married to a U.S. citizen. I applaud President Biden for today's truly significant announcement. It's going to help keep hundreds of thousands of families together. That's what it does. Bring families together, keep them together. And it will provide peace of mind and dignity, and most of all, opportunity to contribute so that these people can contribute to this country even more. The announcement will help make our economy stronger, as these spouses will be eligible for work permits at a time when there's a shortage of workers in so many different professions, and give them a long-term path to stability. The announcement's an affirmation of what America is truly about at its core: a land built by immigrants, a land of opportunity for people who want to contribute to this country, who know that our way of life is the best way if you work hard to get ahead and provide a better life for your children. The vast majority of those who will benefit from today's announcement have been in this country for decades, an average of 23 years. They've been here, but in a state of limbo, according to the White House. To them, America's home. America is where they built families. America is where they gained skills, worked hard, contributed to our economy, earned a living, and had children who will often go on and do better things than them. That's the American dream. That's the American story. And that's been true for generation after generation, until a MAGA group of Republicans decided that they were anti-immigrant. Let's not forget, President Reagan, President H.W. Bush, President W. Bush were both all pro-immigration until this 180-degree reversal by the Republican Party to be anti-immigrant, which hurts America. Of course we need to secure our borders. Of course. No one denies that. But to just bash immigrants is bad for America, bad for America. Fighting for dreamers and pushing for comprehensive immigration reform is one of the issues that has burned strongest inside me since I joined the Senate. I was proud of leading the Gang of Eight, bipartisan, with John McCain over 10 years ago to pass comprehensive immigration reform, which passed the House with strong bipartisan support. I think it got 68 or 69 votes before House Republicans killed the bill. House Republicans poisoned by the thinking of the MAGA Republicans in their midst. I today celebrate today's announcement, but Congress must do its part. Republicans must stop getting in the way of meaningful, comprehensive immigration reform and getting in the way of border security. They wouldn't even support our tough border bill put together with bipartisan vote. We're going to keep working until we get the job done, both in securing the border and in making America welcome to many immigrants who will work hard, become American citizens eventually. Thank you, and I yield the floor. Mr. President, for as long as I've known Joe Biden, I've known him to be a man of one thing, a man who fervently loves his country. From the moment he was elected to the Newcastle County Council, to his swearing in as Delaware Senator at age 30, to his elevation as our nation's 47th president, to his election as our 47th vice president, to his election as our 46th president, Joe Biden's North Star has not changed: serving the people of the United States of America. This weekend, President Biden made the kind of decision only a true patriot can make, choosing to pass the torch and to step away from the presidency at the conclusion of his term. I know President Biden's decision wasn't an easy one, but once again, he put the needs of his country and our future first. It's a bittersweet moment, but one that fills every single one of us who know President Biden with limitless gratitude. On behalf of a grateful Democratic caucus, on behalf of a grateful Senate, and on behalf of a grateful nation, I wish to say thank you to President Biden for dedication to our country. And we will keep working with him every single day until this term is done. By willingly passing the torch, Joe Biden is precisely the kind of leader George Washington would have hoped for. In his farewell address, our first president affirmed that elected office belongs to no man or woman alone, but to the people above all. 230 years later, President Biden honors George Washington's example in a way few presidents ever have. But to those of us who have known Joe Biden all these years, we know that this is who he truly is, a man of profound decency. He is at his core an honorable man, a family man, a man of faith. And he restored those qualities to the presidency after 4 years of disaster under the previous administration. Now, future generations will look at Joe Biden's presidency and see it was one of the most consequential in American history. It may seem like a lifetime ago, but when President Biden entered office, America was in crisis. A once-in-a-century pandemic was claiming thousands of lives day by day. Our economy was on life support, and in the aftermath of January 6th, American democracy was hanging by a thread. 3.5 years later, America is stronger, more prosperous, and our future is brighter because of President Biden's leadership. And it has been an honor for me of a lifetime to work side by side to bring the Senate Democratic agenda to the life here in the United States Senate. With President Biden, we've created 15 million new jobs since the depths of the pandemic, the most in a single term. With President Biden, we've lowered the cost of prescription drugs for tens of millions of Americans. We empowered Medicare to negotiate with drug companies for the first time ever. We made insulin $35 a month for millions of seniors, and we expanded affordable health care to more Americans than ever before. With President Biden, we enacted a generational infrastructure bill to rebuild America, fixing the roads and bridges and highways and lead piping and expanding broadband to so many rural and inner-city areas that didn't have it. I was proud to lead these efforts in this chamber. With President Biden, we passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, the first since the Brady Bill that I led as a member of Congress back in the 1990s, and I remember working then with Senator Biden on gun legislation, both the assault weapons ban and the Brady Law. With President Biden, we enacted the boldest clean energy bill in the history of our nation, the Inflation Reduction Act. Because of this bill, our kids will breathe cleaner air. Our communities will see less pollution. The next generation will enjoy millions of new, good-paying green jobs that will last for generations, jobs with a future. With President Biden, we revived America's grand tradition of scientific research and technological innovation. With the CHIPS and Science Act, advanced manufacturing is coming back to America, to cities like Syracuse and Albany, but also in states like Arizona and Ohio and Idaho and Texas and so many others. And with President Biden, America's led the free world to defend democracy in its hour of need. He united the nations of NATO to stand with the people of Ukraine against Vladimir Putin. And NATO is stronger and larger today than it was when he took office. Incredibly, Mr. President, there is still much, much more. President Biden led the way in appointing the first black woman to ever serve on the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. I worked with him and my colleagues here in the Senate, I thank so many of them, to confirm more than 200 federal judges, the most diverse slate of judicial and federal nominees America has ever seen. We worked with him on our historic veterans' health reform. We expanded federal protections for marriage equality. All this and more. Truly, President Biden's legislative accomplishments are without equal in our recent history. Of course, the work is not done. This is not a moment of culmination because we have a lot of work left to do. For everything that has transpired these past few weeks, one thing has not changed. Senate Democrats will continue working with President Biden, with Vice President Harris, and with the entire Biden-Harris administration to make life better. And it was so typical of the president when he called me to tell me the news that he was not running again. He said, but we have a lot more work to do over the next several months. It shows you the commitment of the man to making the lives of people better. So we will continue to work on those issues, but for now, I want to say, for a grateful nation, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Joseph Robinette Biden. What an amazing legacy President Biden will leave for future generations. History will say at this moment, here was one of our great American presidents. He's a leader who made the most difficult choice at the most important moment because he believed it was the right thing to do. Here is someone who put country ahead of self until the very end. Last night, the American people saw why Joe Biden will go down as one of our nation's most consequential, most decent, most patriotic presidents. Over the last 3 years, he has amassed a record of accomplishment that has few equals in the history of the Senate. We in the Senate here, in many times bipartisan, sometimes not, worked hard with the president to create one of the great legislative records in a year, in the year 2022. When President Biden entered office, America was in crisis. But today it is stronger, more prosperous, has a more hopeful future because of his steadfastness, his strength, his vision. So this morning I wish to say yet again, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. You've shown what the world looks like to put our country over self. You have restored dignity and honesty and integrity to the White House. I think of the song in Hamilton, we're going to teach them how to say goodbye, that George Washington sang in the play anyway, about not knowing when to stay and when to leave. Well, at this moment, Joe Biden is standing right next to George Washington and showing America he understood that message. It's been an honor to work with the president to enact the most ambitious legislative agenda since the Great Society. With President Biden, we have made tens of millions of Americans' lives better, and we'll keep working with him until his term is complete.